Hi, welcome to the Agile Commute. I'm Casey.
And I'm John, and thanks for joining us on the ride today.
Oh my gosh, it's our first episode. This is I can't even believe that this is happening.
Yeah, I know how long how long have we been preparing to do this?
Um, well, I guess maybe like over a year, but if you're being really particular, I mean, probably like 2020.
Well,
So,
that's when we started talking about it, I think.
well, I originally wanted to do a YouTube channel in 2020 in the midst of COVID because I was bored and I apparently had nothing better to do, but then that didn't really work out between COVID and then also getting my master's. And then eventually we started
Oh
working
yeah.
together again. And then we had
That was
our
crazy.
terrible, toxic work environment, which actually then reignited the idea of having a podcast. And so here we are. Amazing.
Yeah, actually it's really kind of cool how harsh environments spawn really cool things.
That's like a whole topic we can talk about trauma bonding. Oh boy.
Oh yeah, that's another
Um,
topic.
but yeah, my parents are adorable. So I've been telling them about the podcast and some of the plans. And I was literally talking to my mom yesterday and she's visiting my grandma. She was like, "Oh, I showed grandma your YouTube channel." I was like, "Okay, there's nothing there, but thanks." But yeah, I was talking to my dad.
It's subscribe.
Yeah, I was like, "Grandma, you want to learn about Agile?" Um, but yeah, I was talking to my dad about this a few weeks ago, and I was like, yeah, John and I are trying to figure out what the first episode should be and some of the topics. And my dad doesn't listen to podcasts. He's not in on the podcast life. And so he was like, "Oh, well, what's the first thing that you would teach somebody about Agile? Like, what's the first thing somebody learns about it?" And I was like, that's kind of interesting thought. I mean, we're not here to necessarily teach or give explicit training, but from that, I figured we could talk a little bit about what's the first thing that we learned about it or our first experience. So I guess I'll ask you, what's the first time you've ever heard about it and or your first experience with it?
Mm, yeah, it was the same time, and I don't know what the first thing that I learned. I have no idea because it was for me like an avalanche, a big flood of information.
And how long ago, how many years ago was this?
It was how many years is that? I have to do math in my head
I know
now.
because
So
you're
it was
old as dirt.
no, it wasn't that long ago. It was 2011. So it was. I had just been working as in a like kind of a mathematical think tank, and then I wanted to move closer to get a job closer to home. And I just was looking for any kind of job, and there was a place that was closer, and they had an opening for a PM. I'm like, okay, I think I can do that. So I applied, and then I got it. And then the first team I was on was an agile software development team, but it was I had no idea. I was like, okay, sure, agile software development team. I had no idea what agile was. Um, and it was with Booz Allen, who was not at the time known for their agile software development teams. So
So I have a
yeah.
question. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you
Mhm.
off, but you said you were doing mathematical think tank stuff. So had you ever done PM work before, or was being in a managery leadershipy position also new? If you were deep in, I don't know, math statistics. I don't know,
You you sound
smart people
you sound very
things.
smart.
I'm not. People are gonna learn that very quickly how dumb I am.
No, well, okay, so my background leading up into this was the only project management that I had was from the military. I was in the Coast Guard, and there it's I would say compared to project management and IT services, it's kind of a different animal. It's way more it's really actually way more prescriptive, top down, and authoritative and coercive. Really, do this because I order you to do it. If you don't, then you're going to be punished.
Yikes.
That kind of environment and situation. Then I went into kind of the opposite because my educational background with math was applied math, and it was, hey, this is the analysis that we need to do. It involves modeling and simulation or probability theory, so we just go and do it, and then we get together and say, okay, where are we? And then And then, okay, I'm writing this report, and then that's it. And there's just one person that's organizing the information, getting to the customer. So there was, I went from really, really hard and strict project management to almost none. And then this somewhere in between, which was agile. So that was my background leading into this thing. And I didn't even know what, like I said, I didn't even know what agile was at the time. So I'm like, is this going to be very strict and rigid, or is this situation going to be like loosey goosey where I just came from?
Yeah, I mean, if you took it at face value of Agile, I would hope you wouldn't assume that it's rigid, but
Yeah, so from my perspective, I had no idea what Agile had to do with IT services. I'm like, Agile, last time I heard that was sports. So, like, I got, okay, I guess we're gonna, I don't know, do exercises, I guess. So, they brought me in, and the PMO, or the program management, said, "All right, so it's gonna be a small software development team, and we're gonna do it agile." I think that's what they said. We're gonna do it agile, or do agile. And so I didn't know what that meant. So I asked my manager, and he didn't know. He said, "Well, maybe you should go to training." I'm like, "Okay,
wait. Your manager also didn't know what these people were talking about?
correct."
Who are these people? They were just like higher level manager people.
Well, so I don't blame them entirely. They were desperate, and I didn't know that at the time, and I'll go over that in a few minutes, because that was interesting. But yeah, so I went and found. I just Googled. I'm like, okay, what is Agile? Okay, cool. There's this 3-day training thing, Agile fundamentals. And it was like, okay, I think the description is for a beginner that doesn't know anything, and they're just going to do an overview of everything. So I'm like, great, I'm going to do that. What I didn't know at the time was the guy giving the training was phenomenal and fantastic.
And the training you went to, you said Agile fundamentals. Just to be more specific, that was the IC Agile fundamentals.
Yes, yes,
And
it was.
just in case people who are listening don't know, IC Agile is one of the big, heavy hitting Agile organizations that exist out there. And they offer a lot of different training. But just in case
Yes.
people didn't know.
Yeah, they were at the time, they'd been around for a number of years, but they really weren't that big. Despite the name, it's the International Consortium of Agile. It's a global certifying body. And they just started getting bigger at the time. And so I took this training, and I thought it was phenomenal. And the way it was delivered was phenomenal. And I drank the Kool-Aid hard. And I didn't even, that was the single biggest change for me. That was probably the catalyst of why I'm a coach today.
What do you think? What were, I don't know, the top three reasons that you were drawn in so much and that you wanted to drink the Kool-Aid?
Oh, well, one, his attitude, frankly, the guy's attitude, the trainer, because the way he looked at stuff was with a complete open mind, and it was not focused. It's not necessarily focused on doing great things. He was more focused on the people that were doing the great things. And if you focus all of your energy on the people doing the great things, and you just said, this is the outcome that we need to achieve, and here's some things that we could do. What do you think is the general way to, he portrayed it? That I thought was great, because despite being in a very coercive environment in the military, my leadership style and philosophy was kind of the polar opposite from the norm. It was more focused on, so my fundamental belief was that if I focus on my team and the people doing, like if I was on a boarding, or if we're trying to, go search and rescue operation to find somebody in the water, if I just focused on my team and said, "What do you need? What do you need? I'll protect you and get you what you need, and this is our mission," and making sure that you can do the mission. That was my philosophy, and along with a lot of other servant leadership style kind of things. I didn't know what servant leadership was at the time, but I knew the practices, because it was a certain particular leadership style. So that's what I believed in. And Agile, in that training, I found out, wow, all the things that I believe about leadership and the way we should treat people, these people wrote it down, and they made a system out of it, and it's called Agile. And that's one of the main reasons why I just jumped on that ship and just didn't look back, actually. So it codified everything that I thought was good about working with people. So it just so happens that that trainer, uh, very soon after me going to that training, he became the president of IC Agile, and he still is the president of IC Agile. So I'm like, wow, that was extremely fortunate of me to have been trained by their top person.
Yeah, seriously.
So, and yeah, his name is Ahmed Sitsky, and I can't say enough good things about him. He's fantastic. So I came back from training on fire.
Oh boy, that's
I was like,
dangerous.
yeah, no, it was I don't even know what it was like for my team. They
They were
were
probably
I
scared.
couldn't imagine. Yeah,
They're
they
running
were
for
like,
fire
oh my gosh.
extinguishers, hiding under desks.
Yeah, this guy is like he was enthusiastic before, but now he's like crazy.
Oh my god.
So, yeah, because I came back very excited and I said, "Hey, this is really good stuff. Let's try this. Let's try that. Let's try this. Oh, that didn't work. Okay, no problem. Let's try that." I'm a natural optimist, and boy, was it just amped up. And that was my first exposure. So I can't pinpoint the first thing that I learned because it was everything. And then while I was at training, I was like a sponge. I was writing everything down. I reread the material. I re-reviewed the materials after I came back. And I continually re-reviewed the materials while we went because I had so many questions about. It's one thing to go over the theory in a very controlled environment in training, and it's something completely different when you're trying to apply it, especially in an environment that's used to top down rigid plan driven kind of project management. So I had a lot of questions and I didn't have chat GPT at the time. So I had to rely on all my notes and on the materials. And I wasn't the best scrum master. So that's another thing. I was the PM, but I decided to be a scrum master. Even though I had the authority of the PM, I said, okay, that's nice to know, but I'm just going to be a servant leader. And it worked out really well.
We are gonna at some point have to talk about job interviews and job recs and things like that because you said you were working for Booz and I interviewed with them at some point and they wanted me to I think basically be the same thing that you were in this position of like a PM, but they really wanted me to do a lot of other things, but
Yeah.
like also be a scrum master and like also be a product owner and also do this and also do that. And I was
Yeah.
like, I don't know, maybe.
Yeah.
We'll see.
Yeah.
I didn't take the job. I had a different offer that I preferred, but yeah, we'll have to talk about that at some point. I think that's just that whole topic is kind of fascinating. But
Yeah. And it's a growing trend too.
either way, I feel like, I mean, you and I have worked together for a long time. um,
Yeah.
I just feel like your whole personality is very naturally inclined, or it's very easy for you to pick up on some of like the servant leadership and agile things, whereas other people's personalities maybe not so much.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, it is. I learned that along the way too.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's it was easy for me to pick up on it because it was like it was a strength. So it excited me and it energized me. So it didn't take very much effort, like you said. Whereas a different personality type, it would probably take a lot of cognitive effort and emotional energy just to absorb a certain concept, much less a mindset.
Yeah. So I guess to like put a bow on your first experience, I'll ask
Well,
you.
well, I was going to add one more thing, and it was related to something that you brought up when I was first starting in on this story with it being Booz Allen and my program management. They didn't know what agile meant at the time.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so this is why. And and they didn't tell me this until 3 months in. So 3 months in, I was on fire with agile, and I'm a new PM. And I didn't think much about them not knowing what agile was. I'm just like, okay, well, I'm supposed to just go find out and then implement on the team. Oh, also, all along the way too, I got in trouble with my PMO a lot because they did not understand why I was doing things the way I was doing them, and it looked like we were playing around a lot. We had Nerf guns, we had tea time, we were laughing constantly, and they didn't like it. But they were tolerant of it because we were the second effort at developing the application we were developing. The first effort was a $1 million failure. And by failure, they had 400 requirement, they had a several page 400 requirement document, like several page document, requirements document of 400 requirements that they spent a considerable amount of time creating. Then they handed it over to a team. and the team kind of went away and developed it for a year. And then the first time that anybody saw the application was after that year, and they gave it to the customer, and the customer asked the users, "Hey, okay, here's your thing," and it was never used. It was shelved.
So, I mean, basically just waterfall.
Yeah,
They basically
yeah,
operated with waterfall, and big shocker, it didn't
yeah.
work,
Yeah, so
right?
they were desperate because they were in trouble. So the customer said, "What are you gonna do about it, Booze?" And they said, "Okay, well, we're gonna do it. We're gonna con Please don't cancel us. Please give us more money because we're gonna do it differently for cheaper, and we're gonna do it agile because that's what agile advertises." And they had no idea what that meant. So they were grasping at straws, and it was all luck and timing that I just got in there with a certain attitude that made it work. I could imagine if it were somebody else that wasn't really into this kind of stuff, I can imagine it being really rough, if not problematic and prone to failure. Oh, incidentally, $1 million failure after a year. When my team did it, after 3 months, we had something working in test, and even though our users weren't allowed to do this, they were using our system in test. And then after 6 months, we deployed version 1.0, which is very stripped down, very bare bones and basic, but 100% of all the features were used every single day by the users because we were trying to figure out what they needed, and we did just that and only that. So that was my first experience.
Yay. I would clap, but I'm too lazy.
So Casey, what was your question, and what was your first experience and our first thing you learned about Agile?
Well, I guess I'll save my question then. So I actually learned about Agile in undergrad. I went to undergrad for information systems or information technology, whatever flavor was at your college. But basically, like you learn a lot about the system development lifecycle or the SDLC, which is mostly equated to waterfall, which maybe people have heard of that, a type of way to develop. And I mentioned it before when we were talking just now about the story you told with booze of like you collect the requirements and you analyze them and then you build it and then you test it and deploy it, and they're all relatively siloed phases, which there's a time and a place for that for certain types of projects. And on a lot of software projects, and again in undergrad and in the classes I took, they were like, oh, there's this new thing called Agile, which is agile and iterative and incremental. And I was like, okay, I don't really know. Like, I get the words that you're saying, but that was basically it. That was the surface level that they taught. And this was in like the early 20 teens.
Wow. So I got a question. Um, how big was that segment in your class? Was that like
Oh
a
my God,
several
so
week thing,
small.
or was it like
No, it was like a 3 second, like, oh, by the way.
that's fantastic.
But most of the textbooks and most of the classes were centered around the system development lifecycle
Yeah.
in terms of waterfall. And that's what most of like the engineering classes that I took were about. And I would say, shockingly, I finished my master's relatively recently because I took a break and I went back to school later. And even in my master's class, which was in systems engineering, it wasn't, it still wasn't as prominent as I was expecting. I mean, that
Man.
was many years later. And I mean, they did talk about it more, I will say. They definitely got better. But yeah, in undergrad, they were just like, okay, and this is this thing. And so I'm close with my parents. I'm sure people will, all the listeners will know very quickly. But I was talking to my mom about a lot of this stuff in undergrad, and she shared her experience. She's had a very wide ranging career. But at some point in her career, she was doing software development and she was on an extreme programming team. And she talks about that like it was one of the highlight parts of her career. She was like, oh my gosh, it was so fun. And we were working together. And these were all the things about XP and blah, blah,
Sounds
blah.
common.
And interestingly enough, too, because I feel like this is a common misconception that I hear from people of like, oh, well, Agile was founded in 2001. But like, not really. I mean, yes, it was founded officially, but this stuff was going on before then, as you and I know, and hopefully listeners will also learn if they don't know it already. But my mom was doing XP stuff in the 80s. XP's been around.
Yeah.
So either way, like she and I had some good chats about that. So that was kind of my first, having learned about it a little bit. My first actual experience was when I graduated college. I was fortunate, got a job out of college at a consulting firm, and I got put on a software development team. And it was a Scrum team on a SAFe program, so Scaled Agile Framework. And I don't remember how many teams we had, so I'm going to kind of like fill in some of the fuzzy details.
I need to break in
Oh,
really quick on this one
oh,
because
sure. Yeah.
this is for those of you listeners that have a certain opinion about SAFe. Um,
I
it
have a
is
lot of opinions.
it is still my opinion is I would still consider it scaled agile. I know some people, some criticisms out there are would call it it's waterfall disguised as agile, but I disagree because of there's a lot of stuff there, but it's still at its heart. It was developed off of agile principles. So Casey, I'm curious, what's your opinion of it? Where do you fall in the opinion
Um,
spectrum?
I tend to like it. I have gone back and forth throughout my career. So on this program, I didn't really know anything going into it. So I did a lot of learning, similar to you, Googling, figuring things out. And I thought it was kind of neat. And then I learned more about it, had some more experiences with it, and I was like, this is dumb. I was definitely in the camp of, this is just waterfall. Why are we doing this? This is silly. It's so much overhead. It's so much extra work. And then I got onto a SAFe program later in my career that was incredible. It was one of the highlights of my career. And I saw it really working, and I saw it being used, I think, in kind of in a way where you are able to take the basic foundation of SAFe and stay true to all of the 12 Agile principles. I think when we went to the Scrum at Scale class, where our instructor was like, oh yeah, SAFe gives you 100% of the stuff, but you probably only need about 10 to 12%. And it's up to you to find what that 10 to 12% is.
Yeah.
And that I feel like really resonated with me. And I feel like when things started to click as far as SAFe being not annoying. Sorry
Yeah,
if
yeah.
people like SAFe.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, okay, well, you look at the framework, you understand what the foundational pieces are, and you use those. But I have found that on these big programs where you have multiple teams, one of the weaker points that I've experienced is that there's not very good product ownership in general. And I feel like having SAFe have these, I'll say quarterly planning events, which they're not always quarterly, but for the sake of this conversation, quarterly planning events is a forcing function for the teams and a product owner to actually manage their backlog and have a plan and organize and coordinate dependencies. I know it's kind of bad, but if teams aren't going to wind up being disciplined doing that on their own, then having that is kind of helpful.
So teams are busy delivering, right?
Yeah.
If the named product owner isn't really knowledgeable or has the skills to be a good product owner, they're probably more focused on making sure the team has what they need to deliver. So
Yeah, but this is like, we should take this as a whole topic at some point, talking about SAFe. But for now, just as far as the first experience I had, they weren't really even doing SAFe, to be honest. Like they said that they were. And I didn't know any better at the time, but they had big room planning, which we didn't really do big room. I don't even know how to explain it, but it was big room planning is when all the teams get in a room together and like they all plan together. But it was really more that each individual team went into a giant room and did quarterly planning with the customer there.
So they were all in the same location, but they weren't all.
Yeah, and we would just like rotate who was in this giant room, and the
Okay.
customer was there. And I was like, I feel like this is sort of defeating the purpose a little bit, but what do I know? I didn't know anything. I was just there to learn. I was a technical writer, actually. Like I got hired to be a business analyst, and I was primarily doing technical writing.
Now, were you on a team?
Yeah. So I was on a software development team, and it was a primarily back-end system. So I had previous experience. I was working in college, and I did a lot of testing and like QA and quality assurance. And I mostly did front end stuff. So when I was on this team and it was an entirely back end product, I was like, oh, well, I guess I can't really help in that regard. But they had me do a lot of technical writing. But through my usual personality, I can't just do one thing. And so I started learning more about Scrum and learning more about software development teams. And then I slowly started doing more Scrum mastering. I slowly started doing more product ownering.
Product ownering. I like that. Coin that
I
phrase.
mean, what else?
Product ownering.
I mean, because it's not really like, yeah, I don't know, product ownering.
I'm going to write down all of these Casey-isms.
I mean,
You have a number of them.
My team jokes at work. So I'm actually on a SAFE program now, and we started PI planning bingo, which we'll get into at some point. But they were like, we could probably make a whole bingo card of just like the weird stuff that you do and say. And I was like, great, thanks, guys. But either way, on this team, I was just slowly starting to do more and more. And I really liked the developers on the team, and they were super cool. But my PM, my boss, who was kind of supposed to be, I guess, the product owner, it wasn't totally clear. He was a disaster. Oh my God. So my PM, I don't really feel like there's any way to put this lightly. He eventually was fired after I left my team. So just to like, I guess, preface everything that I'm going to say of that, I'm not trying to be dramatic when I say this guy was the worst. Oh my God. He was one of the worst managers I have ever had. And this was, again, I was like 22 years old, fresh out of college. This is the first like real Agile Scrum team I'd been on.
Well, what kind of company? What kind of company was this?
I mentioned it was a consulting company.
Yeah. Okay. So it was a big consulting company.
Yeah, big consulting company. And I had kind of two managers. This guy was my direct manager, and then there was another guy above him, and I was close with the guy above him. And I wound up actually doing work across the program. So I started even getting into like RT, or sorry, I shouldn't, I should use the full acronym.
You can say RTE, and then
yeah. So an RTE, or release train engineer, is kind of like the chief scrum master on a SAFE program. I started to do like capturing metrics across all of the teams, like the velocity and burn down charts and things like that. And I started hosting our end of sprint demos across the board. And so I would help facilitate across all of the teams to make sure that they had their stuff. And then I slowly started to take over even the program product backlog. We were using a rather clunky software, but so nobody really wanted to learn it. But they were like, ooh, you're new. You're just like a cute little analyst. We're just going to make you do all the things. So they were like, here, learn how to use this tool and figure it out. And I was like, okay. So then I started managing everyone's backlog, and not necessarily the content, but like, oh, you don't have a story linked to an epic here, or hey, you have these bugs hanging out and they're not allocated to a sprint. Like, where do they need to go? Like that type of stuff. And so I got to do all these really cool things, even outside of my team, which kind of kept me sane, because my team itself, I felt so bad because our PM, as I mentioned, I mean, just as an example, he would facilitate our retrospectives as our product owner, confusing, and then would cause full fights, arguments, extended combative arguments in our retrospective.
Wait, was he facilitating, or did he have an opinion?
I mean, yeah, I guess he wasn't really facilitating. He was pretending to facilitate and then just making everybody angry.
That's awesome.
By being like a complete a-hole. I mean, like I don't even like, this was so long ago. And so I don't remember, but I had an intervention with him. Like I had a full blown, like, you are the problem intervention at one point. And I was like, oh my God, I'm going to get fired. Like, this is so bad. And I didn't get fired, and hooray. But it was bad. My mental health was just absolutely terrible. I would go into the bathroom, I would cry, I would go home, I would cry. And I was living at home at the time, like I had just graduated college. And I went home, I was in absolute shambles. My parents were like, oh my God, what happened? They thought that like something really bad had happened. And I was just like, no, my manager's the worst. They're like, okay, well. Right. And then I felt really justified, though, because eventually I got to leave the team. And this other girl came and replaced me, and she and I were in contact. And within, I don't know, a few weeks, she was like, oh my God, this is terrible. This is the worst. And as she continued working on that team, she shared with me her own struggles of being just completely burnt out, completely depressed, just wiped of any ability to be happy while working on this team. And what kills me too is that when we did a whole reorg and people got to do self-selection, which hopefully we'll talk about self-selection at another
Yeah.
point in
I
time.
like that idea.
Yeah, the gist is basically like you take the whole program and you have all these teams and you have this big event where you get to choose what team you want to go on. Self-selection, you're self-selecting what team. And nobody wanted to go to that PM's team. I mean, like, if that doesn't tell you that there's a problem, I don't know what other information you know or need to know. Literally, everyone was just like, yeah, I'm going to go find another team. So, okay. And I think there was some intervention that leadership had to make as far as they needed to have the programs staffed. And so there was a lot of
Yeah.
negotiation and people had to not be happy about being placed on that team. Luckily, I got to leave. Hooray. But yeah, I mean, that was my first experience. It was honestly, I was thinking about this recently that I did actually wind up getting to learn and see a lot of good practices. I think if I were to go back in time as me now and I were going to coach the program, there's a lot of things I would change and a lot of things I would help make better. But at the same time, when I think about it, I learned about backlog management. I learned about the scrum ceremonies. I learned about pointing poker. We actually used like an online pointing poker tool for all the stories that we did. I learned about the basic metrics of like velocity, burn
Oh, so
downs, things like that.
I have a couple questions.
Yeah.
With what you're just talking about, did you use like Jira or something like that?
No, we had a different tool. Yeah, it wasn't a good tool.
Okay.
And now I feel bad if I say I don't want to like be mean to the software, but it was more kind of almost like a folder file explorer type of
Was it
system.
ServiceNow?
No, 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 no. Basically, it was almost had a folder
Mm,
structure. I'm like, I remember what it looks like. There was like a folder structure on the side that's, oh, here's sprint 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever. And then you go into
yeah.
those and then you can see the epics and the stories. It was very clunky and people didn't like to use it.
So it's like a shared drive. Okay, cool.
No, no. I mean, it was a ticketing system of some sort. And so when you create a new story, there was like a summary and like a description
Yeah.
and place to put the story point fields. I mean, they had all of the basic things. I don't remember like building out the sprints went and putting things in, but it was very clunky. It wasn't as nice as like a Rally or Jira
Mhm.
software that's truly designed for these types of things. But either way, I mean, we were using that, but then for the pointing poker, we just used some online tool. Like you can just Google those things, and basically each team member would go into a link
Yeah.
that would get sent out. And so then everybody would choose their points, and then you could click to reveal the cards. So, and then we would have like the conversation of, oh, you said this was 1,000,000 points and you said this was 0 points. Why are we so off? And then you'd have the conversation, okay, another round. And so we would just use that tool. It was a little bit easier because not everybody always sat in the same location. And then we didn't have to fuss with having physical cards.
Yeah. The reason why I asked is I totally forgot until you started talking about using, online system and for planning poker and all that. Because of some limitations on my first team with what tools we could use, I used 4x6 actual index cards for all of our stories and we were physical. We were a physical team. I kept information in Excel, actually in Excel and PowerPoint. And the reason why I use PowerPoint is because I printed our stories one per PowerPoint slide on those index cards, and I had to manage them with an index card keeper.
Yo, that's terrible. I mean, I know there's benefit to having it physical, but that's too much work.
It's a lot of work, but I'll say this: I think in some ways, it was a better system than using something like Jira, where you can put all information in there and forget it. You just like, okay, I just put it all in there. I just, and then people don't really use it. But with the cards, for some reason, because I gave them to them, I said, this is your cards. These are your 2 cards. Bring them to the next stand up and then talk about them, holding them. And I also had a duplicate of them on a board, physical board, whiteboard. For some reason, we were way more focused on what needed to happen because there's less distractions, I think. And we were all focused on what was on the card. I just thought that was interesting because like today when I coach teams, there's all this information. I'm like, is this really a good thing? Yeah, in some respects, sure.
I feel like I've seen a spectrum like of the teams that I've worked with. Some teams, I think similar to what you're saying, they put an entire novel in a
Yes.
ticket. But where I work now, we don't put that much stuff in there. And even like some of my old programs that I was on, like we would have acceptance criteria and sometimes we wouldn't even have a description, which I know is like, whoa, why wouldn't you do that? But we just knew all of the stuff that needed to happen. And like we all talked about the stuff so
Yeah.
much that it was just like, okay, this is the scope to help us make sure that we can test it
Yeah.
correctly. And like if we needed to put a little bit of notes in terms of implementation or like a reminder, we would put it in there. But a lot of our Jira tickets were quite light. Anyway, so all of that to say, the program that I was on with my first experience with Agile was surprisingly good, minus the really terrible PM. And even that, looking back on it now, as horrible as it was and as annoyed as I still get thinking about it, it I think was still ultimately beneficial for my overall career because it just got me exposed to a lot of, what I'll say, drama very early. And like, how do you navigate that? And how do you even approach people who are in higher positions who are being unreasonable and that type of thing, which isn't directly related to Agile. But I think my first experience with it was, on the whole, very helpful and beneficial for the rest of my Agile career because I was totally bought in after that. I was like, hey, this is awesome. What a great way to manage and organize work and get things done.
Yeah, that's cool. I would argue that addressing leadership of organizations and companies wasn't in scope for Agile, but I think now it's evolved to it necessarily does have to be in scope in order for Agile to succeed where you are, where in a team or a company. So your leadership there, what would you rate their knowledge and competency in Agile? Because mine was like near zero.
Yeah, that's a good question. I would honestly say definitely better than what you
Yeah,
described.
it was. Yeah.
For sure. Like, I don't think there's any getting worse than what you described. No, I mean, they knew quite a bit. My manager's manager, who I talked about, who we got along really well, he knew quite a bit. I mean, his background was in software development, software engineering, and he knew a lot. My direct manager, who was really annoying, I think he understood a lot of basic concepts. I don't think he really understood the mindset, philosophy, principles. Like he knew the motions that you're supposed to take. Oh, you're supposed to have sprint planning on a scrum team
Mechanics.
and you're
Yeah.
supposed to have a retrospective. Yeah, like he at least knew the mechanics, which is more than I can say for some
Yeah.
people, unfortunately. Like he understood story pointing and even like our big top leadership. I remember we had this big collaboration room that we all had to sit in, which was terrible because I hate people. And I had to sit in this tiny cramped room with 1,000 wires everywhere. And like everyone's computers were it was honestly a fire hazard. I don't know why they shoved us in this tiny little room with 1,000 people like crammed next to each other with no elbow room. Like, ooh, we're collaborating. They're so agile. It was so bad. But so this big high up leadership dude came into the room and I don't know if he was listening in on our sprint planning or refinement or whatever we were doing. But at the time I was relatively new and we were doing pointing poker and I was like, oh, well, the team flipped their cards and I didn't. And they were like, hey, what do you think the story points are? And I was like, I'm not a developer. I have no clue. Why are you asking me? And this big super top dog guy, and he was like, hey, you absolutely should participate because you never know what you might be thinking that other people haven't thought of, or like having a completely different perspective can also help get the team to talk things out or explain things more. And like he himself said this to me directly.
There you go.
Which,
Look at that. That's great.
yeah. And I mean, that's what I mean. Like, I think most of the people knew more than your average Joe, and especially your leadership. The fact that this top high up dude could even explain that to me for something so tactical as even story pointing, I was like kind
Yeah,
of
it was good.
impressed.
Yeah.
Which is why, again, like I think overall the experience was positive. I hesitate because I keep thinking about my PM that I really don't like, but it was overall positive in terms of the agile stuff, I'll say. So I'm gonna turn it over to you a little bit. I have a question, a little fun question for you.
Oh, yeah? I can't wait. They're gonna be great. It's gonna be a great question.
I try to ask good questions. But so let's say that aliens invade planet Earth, or extraterrestrials, whatever you want to call them. But so these extraterrestrial aliens come fly in to Earth and they're like, yo, what's up? Because I'm sure that's what they're going to say. And you have the opportunity to tell them what Agile is or what it's about. What would you tell them as far as what it is, or like what's the most important thing that they should know about it?
Well, first of all, I would say, what country do you belong to? Because aliens do not exist. And then, I fundamentally disagree. I am
Oh boy.
not, I don't, they just don't exist. Vampires, sure.
Do you like
Werewolves,
wait,
sure.
wait, hold on. Pause. Do you actually not think aliens exist? Real
Okay,
question.
okay, so real question. So I'm going to rewind back to my mathematics days. So I am a statistician and mathematician. So if we were to calculate the probability of life existing somewhere else in the universe, it is non-zero. I give you that. It is likely non-zero. However, with the how vast the universe is, it is very small. That's not counting time in the mix. Now, when you count time, when you introduce time as a factor, like billions upon billions of years, life existing on two different locations in one universe at the same time with the same developmental maturity of technology, that's near zero. So mathematically, I'm going to say near zero. So
Interesting. All right. Well, in my fake scenario, we've beaten math. we've,
we defy
we've
the laws
conquered
of physics and
math.
math. Check.
Yeah,
Check.
we've done it. And aliens are here. So, what would you tell them?
Okay, so given that, sure, yeah, very small probability. I acknowledge it's non-zero. Okay, cool. Non-zero aliens. Oh, I'm sorry, extraterrestrials. I don't want to offend them. So
Yeah.
they're very sensitive. Say, well, I don't know. Let's see. What's the first thing I'd tell them about Agile, and what's the most important thing they should know about it? If I were to put myself in there, I want to say shoes, but I don't know what they wear. So what would they care about with Agile? I would say one thing that I would tell them is it is the best thing that the human race, has come up with to focus us in on ultimately finding out what the most important thing to do is, and then making sure that that thing gets done. That's what I would say. And there's a whole bunch of tools, techniques, tactics, and a certain mindset you have to have in order to accomplish that. But that's what I would tell them, because I would want them to become agile too. Because
Okay.
whatever they're trying to do, let's say they come here because the likely scenario is that they want to conquer our planet and plunder our resources. So if they want to accomplish that
Why is that the likely
if you want to
scenario?
accomplish that in an effective way, Agile will get you there. So that's what I would tell them. What would you tell them?
Well, first of all, I was kind of debating what type of extraterrestrial creatures these would be, and my brain legit went to the Space Jam.
Oh my gosh.
Okay. Let's see. What would I tell them? Yeah, I sort of, I guess, would assume, like in this case, I took a different viewpoint as far as maybe they're just exploring or they're lost and they're like, ooh, let's study these weird human creatures.
Hmm.
I would tell them that Agile is a way of thinking or being, and the human race has tried to come up with like processes to keep that mindset and way of being alive, and that it's, I think, the way of the future. I hope it's the way of the future. And I would also tell them that there are plenty of people who are stuck in their old ways and cause conflict in trying to achieve this new way of being.
Sure. Yeah.
And then I would try to convert them, like religious people try and convert non-religious people.
Okay.
I would knock on their spaceship door and be like, "Hi, would you like to learn the Lord and Savior of
Yeah,
Agile?"
yeah. Just, drink this Kool-Aid, and then wait for the
Yeah, here
drink
you
this Kool-Aid and
go.
wait for other spaceships to come around to pick you up. Um,
Yeah, they would immediately kill
yeah.
me. They'd be like, "Yeah, no,
So I would
bye."
say this, let's get a little philosophic about it. Um,
Hmm.
if they achieved space flight, if they achieved faster than light speed, I would say it is likely that they are not a coercive society, that they have a growth mindset and not a fixed mindset, because they would have to have a mindset where all things are possible instead of this thing is impossible because of these constraints, or this thing is impossible because we've never done it before, so we can't do it. It won't work here. These are all the arguments that
Yeah,
I've
but
heard.
like, what if like their creatureness? What if they can just like fly through space?
Oh,
I wouldn't need a growth mindset to just do
oh,
that.
just as an attribute of their being.
Yeah, they can
Oh,
just travel through space.
what? That's interesting. I had
Okay, we're really deviating
I
from the
haven't
point.
considered that.
So, so, so your thing is that you think that like this is the way of the future. I guess that's how I feel too. I don't know. Like if I were to actually sit down and teach them though, like we would get into a little classroom, they'd sit at a cute little desk and I'd be up at the whiteboard. Uh, you could just get like paint that
Yeah.
imagery. Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing to well, there's a couple different approaches. I feel like you could approach it in terms of like share the manifesto and the principles, or you could potentially go the route of like history lesson as far as the Toyota
Mhm,
stuff
mhm.
and like how it's changed over the years. Maybe it would depend on how you'd perceive these aliens to want to learn. Like, because if they were like, oh, I want to learn more about like society and how we've gotten to like the current state of the human race, I'd approach it with the history
Ooh, I
lesson.
wouldn't
But if you're like, hey, I want
I would
to,
avoid the
what?
how did the human race get to where we are, because
Why?
it's not all roses. Um,
So?
so what I was gonna say is, I'm not saying it's the way of the future. I'm saying it'll help you create a better society. It'll help you create a better world. But as with human nature, not everyone wants that for whatever reason, consciously or subconsciously. So that, and some people just don't want to be that way because of some reason. So they go back to their old ways, or they go back to something, that they go to something else that won't. You've seen it too. We've seen several areas that we can't do this. That's not for us. That may work there, but it's not. It's, even though we give them stories, we show them, hey, look, the team right next to you is doing it, and they're having a great time, and they're achieving all these things. They don't care. They're just going to be stuck in their ways. So it is an option that you can take, Mr. and Mrs. Alien, if you decide to do it. If you decide to adopt an agile mindset, then I guarantee you the world will be better. But if you don't,
Yo, I can't believe you just gendered our aliens.
yeah, they, he, she, it, they, X alien one and
Okay, we're
X
moving
alien
on.
two.
And we don't want to get you canceled. Yeah, internet's gonna have a field day. But either way, okay. So I don't know. This is a little bit of a silly question anyway, but I feel like I'm gonna have to think about this more. I'm not really satisfied with my answer,
Oh, sure,
but
yeah. We can revisit the alien topic.
yeah, yeah. But to your point about like people either can't or don't want
Yeah.
to kind of have the mindset, I mean, we could talk about that forever. And I know you and I have kind of talked about it a little bit, just as far as like why the growth mindset can be scary for people, because I think that is mostly at the foundation of successful agile transformations and then persisting, having that culturally throughout a team or organization, is that people who well, really everybody, but especially the leaders, like to have that growth mindset and servant leadership be a natural inclination for them. Some people don't want that. They don't want to grow. They're like, I'm happy the way things are. I've done this the same way for the past 20, 30 years. Like, why would I do anything
Mm,
different? I don't need to. It's exhausting.
yeah. And it might, in some cases, in a lot of cases, it would be letting go of something that you have known and or have decided for decades. And it's a whole new world out there if you don't believe that way of being anymore. And yeah, it's tough.
Yeah.
So we're definitely going to have to talk about aliens and bring it up again in another episode. But it looks like we are coming up on our time here together. And we really enjoyed you coming along with us on our ride today.
Yeah. Thank you guys for listening in. And if you've made it this far, again, thank you on our little bumpy pilot episode. Don't forget to like and subscribe, follow us on Instagram and YouTube at the Agile Commute. And if you want to have a more engaging conversation or you have questions or you want to write to us, feel free to email us at theagilecommute@gmail.com. And see you guys next time.
See you later.
Bye.